Thank you for that. Can you hear me? So I'm going to try a little experiment. You have to check Twitter. You'll figure out what it is. So I'm going to talk. Here's my Twitter handle, by the way. Actually, my handle everywhere. And I want to talk a little bit today about exploring the edges and what that means for me personally and creatively. So my journey with where I am today began, obviously, when I was born. But more importantly, it began when I quit my job at a really plush ad agency and started my own company with 2 other friends in Hamburg, Germany. And this is in German, as you see. And the point there is, sometimes you have to take risk and try things out to really understand. And sometimes that risk is better taken before you have a family. Although when you do have a family, sometimes that risk comes back to you. And you get that much more. So my first company I started was called Fork and Stable Media in Hamburg. And then after 4 years, I sold my shares and moved to New York. I got a little homesick. So I was in Hamburg and then moved back to the US, New York. Worked for a company called Fallon. And Fallon in 2000 was best known for the work we did for BMW in 2000. And it was with Clive Owen. I believe it launched his career, in my opinion. But it was asking directors to take BMW as a product and just create their own story. And we had, I think the last one, or one of the last ones was Guy Ritchie and Madonna. That's when they were together. But then after a while, I got sick of working on the screen. And a friend of mine, Casey Rios from New York, he was at MIT at the time, and he was just finishing his degree at the Media Lab. And he said, yeah, they're doing this thing in Ivrea, which nobody knows about, in Italy. And Ivrea is most popular for Olivetti, the typewriters. But they were building a new company, or a new school, sponsored by Telecom Italia, with Gillian Crampton-Smith from RCA and a bunch of other people. And it was in this little town in the Blue House here, Bauhaus style, that a lot of things came from. And I was one of the first students at the time. This was in 2001, 2002. So if you look at all, like, if you look at Arduino and processing was before, but processing Casey brought with him. And so I think what happened here, my point is, sometimes you have to shift away from what you're comfortable doing and try something new and really push what you think you're good at and try something new to actually grow further. So it became out of this experience in Ivrea that I was interested in physical computing. And so one of these experiments was taking a face detection from Colin McDonald, and I wanted to create, everything I had seen at that point had been based on a digital output, so from digital to digital. In this case, I wanted to take the screen and make a physical output. So here I'm moving my eyebrows, it's detecting my face, and I can move a servo. And for me, that's the kind of stuff I do at home. It's almost like Lego 1.0 for most people. But for those of you that play around with Arduino like we did this morning, then you realize there is some kind of satisfaction in being able to create a physical thing from a digital input. And then obviously what's big is also this idea of how can we expand our world. And here, I'm from Minnesota. Here we go to Minnesota every year. And here I'm with my youngest son, and we do, since I bought a drone, a quadcopter, we do these dronies. So we go around, and instead of doing selfies, we create dronies. So this is in Minnesota, really up far, and just trying things out and just changing your perspective on life. And I think that's the thing with tools today. There's so many tools out there, and there's no reason not to try these things. So when I used to work in an agency, you'd come across people, like one of my agencies, I sat across from a planner, and she's like, so you're on Facebook, right? But she wasn't, and Germany's known for being a little bit data conservative. But I'm like, you work in communications as a professional. You have to try these things out. And that's why I think it's so important to try these things out. So that being said, tools are an extension of ourselves. And I think one of the biggest examples of this is this classic spot from 2001 from Kubrick with the monkey, or the Neanderthals, and they're playing around with bones. And it's all about domination of the water pit. But when one Neanderthal has the tool, then he just, they kind of obliterate the other ones and they become king. And it goes back to what Philip was saying in the quote, technology is what makes us who we are, it makes us more human. It's kind of brutal, but it's not, because it's not that brutal. And this is the epic scene where he throws it up, and then it dissolves into a spaceship, So we're somewhere in between these two places. So we aren't quite there in the spaceship, but there's people working on that. So if you think about that, you know, the bone is the past, and the spaceship is the present, or the future, then our present is the phone, you know, we're somewhere in between here. And there's a lot of steps in between that, but what's interesting with this is, it's a technology, it's been almost 10 years since the smartphone, maybe not quite, give or less, take a few. It becomes part of us, and that's when technology becomes interesting, is because when it becomes, you know, you don't really think about it. So through that, you know, you have this, you know, you have people creating things, you know, that someone creating a video of their strange-looking cat, uploading it on YouTube, and then she's able to quit her job and do other things because of this tool that you don't really think about as a tool. So a little bit in comparison to what creative arts was, or creative application was shown, this is quite lowbrow in its case, but you know, I think there's a lot of implications for people putting stuff out there and then making it real. So this boundary between physical and digital. So here, these artists, you know, it's like an art of collective in the U.S. in 2013. They used Grumpy Cat as their catalyst for doing things. So you had, you know, these a little bit older people, you know, she'd create a watercolor and then they would sell it on eBay and they would take the money and put it towards their club, their art club. And then, you know, you have these rugs. It's almost the complete opposite of creative applications, but it's also, I think, valid because for Grumpy Cat, you know, Grumpy Cat has become almost like the Hello Kitty of our times. And this is my favorite, you know, the stained glass, or grumps a lot, you know, and this is, I think there's a lot of value in creating, you know, things in the real world. And this sold for about almost 1,100, you know, and that, I think I wouldn't mind Sir Grumps a lot in my house. He's kind of cool. So I got to really hustle. So what's interesting here is we're talking about basically earnings, what people value. So it's all about attention. So I mean, this you've probably seen, and really people value Grumpy Cat a lot more than Gwyneth Paltrow, which I find quite nice in my point of view. And what it also means is all of a sudden we have all these resources at us. So it used to be, if you think about media and art and stuff, it used to be all about the resources. So big companies, publishers and stuff, they were based on scarcity. And it's no longer about scarcity, this idea of, okay, there's only a certain amount of things. Because with the internet, we have an abundance of things, and you have to choose what you're interested in. And that's the hard thing today for a lot of people, at least businesses. For us, it's pretty easy. So I have a quote here. Imagination is an extension of reality. And I think that's really true. It's not a quote, but it's something I wrote. I think what's important here is to think the things we choose to surround ourselves shape what we become. And it's almost a McLuhanism as well. So whatever we choose to do, if we just surround ourselves by consumption, that's what we become, consumers. But if we do it the other way, so these are some pictures of my two boys. So we try to have them play with technology in the sense of, you know, don't have too much respect for technology. You know, have respect for what you can create with technology. So here he's taking little bits in Lego. Here they're playing around with the Kano. You know, all these little kicks right here. Obviously I work at Google, so I had Google Ads here. He's trying on Google Ads, but you can tell of the way they use Google Ads. You know, it's kind of cool, but man, not that cool. That obviously it wasn't going to be that popular, in my opinion. And here they're flying the drone in Minnesota again. So it's always fun to have, you know, kids play around with new technology because it opens their eyes to what's possible. It's like giving them a new set of crayons, kind of. And then we travel a lot. Like last year as a family, we traveled, you know, I guess to 8 places from Tel Aviv to Sweden to US, New York. And what's interesting here, we were in Sweden, and they had this robot, you know, it's a robot, and it mows the lawn, you know, it has a chorus, and it mows the lawn. And it becomes something in the background, but that's something my kids, you know, our kids are the future that we're surrounded with, and this is something they live with day to day. So I want to talk about 3 things that have really influenced me, actually 4 things. So I do read books. I think a lot of people think that people don't read books today, but I think people do read books. So if you're interested in seeing the future, I think it's really important to see what people are thinking about, people that are thinking of the future. So there's Snow Crash, there's Demon, and then there's Ready Player One. All very digestible, all not too geeky in the way Philip K. Dick is, but more pop culture. And if you really hate sci-fi, but you love like pop culture, then I would just recommend Ready Player One, because that's all about pop culture. I got to really hustle. And then there's 3 films that I really think have shaped my view of the future. There's one, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, very dystopian. There's Her that came out 2 years ago, Spike Jonze, and then Mike Mills. And what's interesting here, in the future, in my opinion, it's all going to be about AI. It's all going to be one big Turing test. You know, who's the human and who's the machine? And at some point, we won't really know what that means because it'll just become everyday life. So let me just play a few scenes. What's interesting here is in the AI and in Blade Runner and her, I don't know if Spike Jonze was riffing on Ridley Scott or vice versa, but they talk about the relationships with their mothers in the interviews.
It's a test designed to provoke an emotional response. Shall we continue? Describe in single words only the good things that come into your mind. About your mother?
My mother?
Yeah.
Let me tell you about my mother.
Okay, and the next one is her. It's the machine interviewing the human. Also interesting.
How would you describe your relationship with your mother?
It was fine, I think. Well, actually, I think the thing I always found frustrating about my mom is, you know, if I tell her something's going on in my life, her reaction is usually about her. It's not about...
Thank you. Please wait as your individualized operating system is initiated.
And that movie is quite amazing. If you look at some of the stuff, so he works as a person that writes personal letters for people, and the machine, you know, it prints out like personal hand signatures or hand, you know, type. So it seems like it's a person. But there's machines that can do that now. There's a service that you can, you know, you send it to somewhere and it'll write a certain style for you and everything. So we aren't that far away. And the last thing is a documentary from Mike Mills. And what's interesting here is he interviewed kids that lived in Silicon Valley, and their parents worked at companies like Intel, Apple, or Google, and he asked them, you know, what do you think their future is going to be like in 70 years? So I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's a little tight with time, but we'll show it.
In your lifetime, but towards the end of your life, like 70 plus years from now, 70 years into the future, do you think the world's going to be different?
Yes.
How's it going to be different?
Well, I think people will invent like other technology and like improve on things like cars and houses.
Oh my gosh. Let's see here. You won't have to drive a car. You'll just sit in the back going, like you can fall asleep in your car and you'll be like, beep, 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 you're here.
I probably won't even like see my grandchildren. I'll probably Skype them or somehow see them on TV or a 3D movie of them or something like that. And I'll live in a floating house or something.
Oh yes, I think there'll be much less wildlife. I think there'll still be trees, but the wildlife will really almost vanish because there are very few people who are trying to preserve wildlife right now.
For one thing, there's going to be a lot more technology. For the second thing, I'm probably going to think that it's going to be a lot harder to determine which country is the most I don't know how to say that.
Technologically advanced? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, even though, because everyone's going to have that stuff.
So I'm going to skip that heck for time purposes. But I think what's interesting, I was talking to Philip, because I know Philip has a daughter as well, and I have two boys, 6 and 8. And even if you don't have kids, you can remember what it was like being a kid. But I think even if you don't have kids, it's interesting to observe kids and how they use technology. And so my family, obviously, I guess we're a bit tech savvy. So instead of in the U.S., usually you go and you get Christmas greetings. So everyone gets, their red sweaters, and you go get a photo, season's greetings from the Abbotts or whatever. So instead of that, what we do every year, we go and get 3D prints of ourselves. So after 5 years, we're gonna have different models of how the kids have grown, how I've shrunken, hopefully not getting too big and stuff. So our kids are surrounded with all these things that we take, some of us take for granted, but for them it's everyday life. So what I want to say there is to really understand the future, instead of looking at technology, you have to look at how children grow up today, because that is really, for me, the standard of where things are going. Kids take this stuff for granted, and if for us, it's like everything. There's a great quote from Hitchhiker's Douglas, but anyway, he says everything we take for granted for stuff that we're born into, but stuff that comes after us, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing it really bad, but the point there is, take the time to observe how people use technology, and more importantly, take the time to observe how kids use technology, because they use it. They don't respect it as much as we do. So then, the question was, so where do we see the, it was posed, that where do we see the creative ecosystem in 5 years? So I think that the real important thing is it's not really so much the answer, but it's the questions that matter. So there's a few things that are happening. So in 5 years, will AI anticipate our every needs? That's something that's happening now. Is artificial intelligence, is it going to become bigger? Obviously, it will be. Will machines give us more leisure time? Larry Page talks about, since we're going to have so much time, maybe we cut down to a 4-day work week. What are you going to do with all that time all of a sudden? Will we work more or less? Are we going to all become more creative or more consumption-based? And I think those are the questions that we should be thinking about. It's not so much about how technology is going to do it, but how is our life going to change when we have all this time, if we have more time. So the last thing I want to leave you with is just that, if you live the questions, life will move you into the answers. And I think it really makes sense to, keep questioning things. I think as we get older, we tend to always want the answer, but we forget as children, we always were questioning things, and we forget that a little bit. So I'm going to leave you with this artist's work, Tully Arnaud's work, and I think it's quite nice in the way it just doesn't really respect what Tinder is about or what Facebook. It's just, it's something he built as an artist because he's just interested in doing these things. Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy.